Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, 80 years ago at this very stage, Winston Churchill called for a new, peaceful and united European structure, a kind of United States of Europe. The backdrop of the speech was the opposite of his proposal. Wrecked by famine, fractured politically. The Second World War had destroyed our cities, scattered our people, and sown deep mistrust among nations, including former Europe and beyond. The Soviet Union was occupying and annexing some countries, including that of its grip over the others. New fears of tyranny and the Cold War had begun, as Churchill made clear exactly 80 years ago when he coined the term the Iron Curtain. What would follow was not yet known. As Churchill spoke from this stage, the world was in geopolitical twilight zone, and we find ourselves here again. It is fashionable these days to speak of the post-war international order crumbling before our eyes. I'm guilty of this myself. But what we truly seek is change. This is why I propose we follow the advice of the psychotherapists and proponents of the 12-step groups. They say that the starting point for change is to identify and name the problem. Europe is collectively addicted to the way the world was, when there was understanding on the primacy of international law and the UN Charter. These did not work perfectly, of course, but they were a foundation. Today, the chaos we see around us in the Middle East is a direct consequence of the erosion of the international law. It started when Russia, a permanent member of the UN Security Council, invaded its neighbor with impunity and good measure of cynicism. This has not gone unnoticed. Instead, it has sent a signal around the world that there is no accountability for one's actions, that the rule book has been thrown out of the window. Without restoring international law, together with accountability, we are doomed to see repeated violations of the law, disruption, and chaos. I will elaborate on this challenge. We in Europe have an existential threat at our doorstep. Russia's military campaign began with Georgia in 2008, then Crimea in 2014, and Syria as a testing ground in 2015, followed by a full-scale invasion in Ukraine in 2022. But Donbas is not Russia's end game. Europe is already fending off Russian cyber attacks on our economy, Russian sabotage against our undersea infrastructure, and Russia's attempts to fracture our alliances and undermine societal cohesion. Beyond that, Russia is weaponizing oil and gas, engaging in military intimidation, and even brandishing its nuclear arsenal. Make no mistake, Russia is not the emerging superpower it was 80 years ago, when the post-war global order was defined. Russia's economy is in shreds, disconnected from Europe's energy markets, and after a decade of conflict, including 4 years of full-scale war in Ukraine, Russia has barely advanced beyond the 2014 lines, at the cost of 1.2 million casualties. This is the very opposite of blitzkrieg. But Russia will remain a major threat to any international order as it was in 1946. And why? Because Russia is executing the most outrageous breaches of international law in United Nations history. And it's doing so with impunity. And because Russia has turned its back on its international duty as a permanent member of the UN Security Council. And also because Russia backs this up with the world's biggest nuclear arsenal. China too is taking advantage of this erosion of rules. China has been preparing the ground for decades to assume its place as a great power. It is expanding its nuclear stockpile faster than anyone else. With impressive strategic patience, China has been creating dependencies around the world, threatening countries in the East and South China Seas, bankrolling Russia's war against Ukraine, and reimagining the world order in its own image. This is not only posing a risk to Europe's economic model, but more broadly undermines the multilateral system that has ensured that rules actually rule. And then there is the fundamental reorientation across the Atlantic, which goes by a variety of names, from realignment to new dynamic and even rupture. The shift in US foreign policy has already rocked the transatlantic relationship to its foundation, with aftershocks in other parts of the world. But the impact on the international order is seismic. Cumulatively, these trends point to a paradigm shift. The current direction is a new world order characterized by competition and coercive power politics, a world order dominated by a handful of military powers who aim to establish and secure spheres of influence. We can already see the weakening of existing international norms, rules, and institutions that we have built over 80 years. How we respond to this moment says less about the new dispensation than it does about us, because we have been here before. The current fragmentation bears similarities to the late 19th and early 20th centuries, now somewhat mistakenly seen by some politicians as a period of stability, interdependence, and peace in Europe. Nationalism and populism were also seen as attractive alternatives to the globalism that many found wanting. Robert Kagan recently wrote of the downside to the multipolarity that emerged back then, which many still advocate for today. The so-called long peace in Europe from 1815 to 1914 was far from it. To bring just few examples, France invaded Spain, Prussia and Austria fought Denmark, then Prussia and Austria fought each other, and then Crimean War, pretty much every European power took part until 500,000 people were killed. Multipolarity was neither peaceful, stable, nor particularly conducive to economic development. And ultimately, it ended in global devastation. In the aftermath of the First World War, in the heady days of Wilson's 14 points, the world community decided to try something different, multilateralism instead of multipolarity, and a League of Nations was born. But this idea was nascent, and countries were perhaps not yet ready. In the United States, for example, partisan politics meant that Congress never ratified the Treaty of Versailles to join the League. From the start, the League was shackled by a lack of economic weight, military credibility, and diplomatic authority, with the absence of the emerging superpower. It also lacked legitimacy in Germany and beyond because it was seen as a product of Versailles and therefore punitive in nature. Still, as Churchill reminded us here in 1946, the League did not fail because of its principles and conceptions. It failed because those principles were deserted by those states which brought it into being. The multilateral system established after the Second World War was therefore a natural evolution. It too has its downsides, not least because it reflected the wartime power landscape of the victors. But there were three positive differences, three signs of collective growth. First, it evolved as the world community evolved. The defeated were soon brought in, and the system also benefited from general sense that punishing the defeated may well cause another round of war. This evolution also meant embracing that many nations that emerged from under colonial rule and including a big chunk of Europe that had been occupied by the Soviet Union. Second, it had the buy-in from the United States, protected from other great powers as it was by virtue of strength as well as geographical distance. And third, and even more astonishing, was the willingness of other great powers and emerging powers to buy in, at least at the time, and at least partially. They opted to legitimize this system at their own expense, giving up ambitions, lands, and influence for the sake of peace and the collective good. And that is the essence of any functional international order. It is also what connects the three disruptors I referred to in the start. In their own way, at varying degrees, each is now pursuing foreign policy mainly for their own interests, much of it at the expense of all the others. They are players in a zero-sum game. That has never been Europe's game. In fact, the history of European Union has followed a similar trajectory to the development of the international order. It too has not been a smooth linear arc. Rather, are realizing the necessity as crisis after crisis expose the limits of national solutions and push our member states toward deeper cooperation. From the devastation of the Second World War to the collapse of the Eastern Bloc, each shock revealed structural vulnerabilities, whether economic, geopolitical, or institutional, that individual governments could not resolve alone. The response was always the same: pool sovereignty in a new domain, create a new institution, or strengthen existing ones. This dynamic produced the European Coal and Steel Community after the Second World War, the European Economic Community after the failure of the defense plans, the single market after the economic turmoil of the 1970s, and the European Union itself after the geopolitical upheaval of 1989. In the 21st century, this pattern has only intensified. The Eurozone crisis forced the creation of fiscal and banking mechanisms unthinkable a decade earlier. The migration crisis expanded EU-level border and asylum tools. The COVID-19 pandemic triggered the first large-scale issuance of a joint EU debt. And Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine accelerated defense coordination, energy diversification, and opened another window of enlargement. The EU's evolution was never a grand master plan. It was a series of pragmatic responses to moments when the status quo could no longer hold. It was possible because the guiding principle of mutually beneficial cooperation. And the same is true of Europe today, as it is of the international order we all belong to. When it comes to Europe, we will find our European way as we always have. For a start, Europe does not and cannot choose between our values and our interests, because our values are our interests. For Europeans who have lived under occupation, like myself, or those who have been their rights taken away by autocratic leaders, Europe truly is the land of the free. Our point of departure is not bad. We have achieved the conditions to lead an excellent quality of life in healthcare, culture, education, infrastructure, and stability. Europe is among the best in the world. Europeans are safe, healthy, happy, and breathing clean air. There is social cohesion, and our fundamental freedoms are protected, including media freedom. But we also need to make some improvements. We have to even out performance among the 27, better our competitiveness, boost our growth, and deepen integration. And all of this is necessary for us to be able to also fulfill our global calling. One of our key challenges in Europe today is to define our goals when it comes to security. In my eyes, security has a wide definition, from our goal of being economic powerhouse and the challenges we face here to our aim to become a hard power force. At the height of the financial crisis, Mario Draghi said we would do whatever it takes to save the euro. That worked because he meant it. My goal is to get to the same stage when it comes to our own security. Europeans have always grown through crises by working together, creating new ways to cooperate, and finding solutions to challenges that serve the collective interest. And that is why, when it comes to the international order, Europe can be part of the solution. There is a famous three-word phrase from philosopher Thomas Hobbes in his 1651 book, Leviathan. Hobbes describes the state of anarchy in a world without order. You all know it. But few recall the full quote as an appeal to working with others, lest life be solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Coming as it did just 3 years after the Peace of Westphalia in 1648, which set the framework for sovereign states, including Switzerland, Hobbes' is ringing endorsement from way back in the 17th century for cooperation. And cooperation is what Europe does best. And that is why today, when states search for someone to lead the effort to bolster alliances and defend international law, more and more they turn to the European Union. I hear this every single time when I meet foreign leaders in Brussels or abroad, because European Union is a reliable partner. And this is today's paradox. The decline in multilateralism has in fact put it back on the table. Even if the biggest military powers are not interested, then everybody else is. The question is, how do we cater for this vast majority? Pundits near and far have been speaking of Europe's reaction to the state of the world in terms of bereavement. The Economist refers to the late psychiatrist Elisabeth Kübler-Ross, who was born here in Zúrich, describing how Europe has worked its way through 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and arriving at acceptance. But acceptance is not the same as agreeing how to adopt. Considering how much my time goes to seeking a common position among the 27 EU member states, I cannot but agree. The time of acceptance is over. The time for action is at hand. And action means transforming the multilateral system into one that meets the expectations of participating states. It must be shown to deliver, and it must work for all. And this brings me back to Churchill's observation that failures stem not from wrong principles, but because the current principles need further development. The events of the last days in the Middle East underline this observation. The people of Iran now stand before a chance for a different future. But I'm concerned about how we got to this point, specifically because it is only the international law that stands between us and the full-blown chaos. So what can we do? For starters, it is time to speak seriously about the reform of the international system. In these discussions, we must recognize that our current system, including the United Nations, its charter, and the international legal environment, exists above all to prevent wars from starting, including by curbing poverty, championing equality, and tackling climate change. Any revision or replacement is doomed to fail if it leaves this part out. The EU has its own long experience reviewing, adjusting, and transforming itself. We know that doing so is not the one-shot project. It involves listening, negotiations, political compromises, and a healthy dose of humility. But today, we have no choice. Knowing that others are also looking to counter entropy, understanding our strengths, but also what we have learned from our failures, the EU is ready to lead these efforts to transform the multilateral system. Because we believe that adjustment will lend us the stability we seek. Moving forward on reform is a process that is neither easy nor simple. It means recognizing the problem, which we have. It means mustering the political willingness to go forward, which we are working on. And it means engaging in the tough discussions it will require, taking a seat at the table instead of leaving an empty chair. It means making decisions stick for everyone through perseverance and follow through. While we consider these big questions, we can take another page from EU's playbook. Whether you call it Hegelian or Schumannian, the EU learned that focusing on practical, incremental steps eventually leads to a qualitative change. Take international law, for example. The UN Charter is an excellent basis, but it was written in analog times. We need an international legal foundation for the digital area, where our rights in the digital space are also protected. We need to rethink the rules of governing maritime space. Now our seabeds are full of cables carrying data across the globe. From cyberspace to outer space, artificial intelligence to the Arctic, there are so many areas where we can and should move forward together. But if we do this, we need to strengthen accountability too, because international law is only as effective as we are willing to make it. Enforcement is essential. No one should be above the law. And whether we speak of bilateral partnerships or alliances, regional organizations, coalitions of the willing, or minilateral, plurilateral, or variable geometry arrangements, all of this are complementary to the international rules-based order, the multilateral system that most of the states want. And in fact, doing more of this cross-regionally and with a critical mass could strengthen the system as whole. The idea is to incubate ideas in smaller formats that could then be taken before the rest of the world to ripen. Dear friends, we stand before an opportunity. Europe can step onto the global stage, united and strong, or resign ourselves to the sidelines. Our illusions are gone, but as Estonia's first post-Cold War president Lennart Meri said, where illusions are shattered, hope is born. Paraphrasing Winston Churchill in June 1940, during the period of the Battle of France, this may not be the Europe's finest hour, but it is Europe's hour of decision. Do we allow the ongoing downward spiral to firm up and cement into place with predictable consequences for Europe and the world? Or do we lead the clarion call to lead in defense of values, the law, together with others? My fellow Europeans, we may feel disheartened and disempowered by much of what is happening around us, but it's now our time to decide. Thank you.
Dear Mrs. Vice President, thank you so much for this very rich presentation with citations throughout the European history, even including Switzerland. Thank you so much. This was wonderful. We have now a Q&A session, and I might start with one or two questions if you allow. The first one is, sometimes I get the impression that the only, if you want, positive thing out of this Ukraine war is that it is uniting the European Union more than it used to be. Do you think that we will see in the foreseeable future a common foreign and security policy of the European Union?
Well, we are working on this every single day. I mean, today we had meeting with European foreign ministers and the ministers of the Gulf countries regarding Iran, and we even managed to get a common position with them. So 27 plus all of them. So we are definitely working on it, but it's never easy because, you know, we have 27 member states. They are all democracies, and of course they also have their own interests around the world in different countries. But you know, coming from a small country, it's all very clear. Although I like this quote by Paul Henry Spaak, who said that, you know, there are only small, you know, two types of countries in European Union or Europe, actually, he said, the countries that are small and those countries who haven't realized that they are small. And this is true. I mean, this is true. When I go around the world and there are countries, you say that, you know, we are small countries, and I check, you know, you are over 100 million, so you are bigger than most of the, or all of the European countries. My point being that coming from a small country, it's very clear that we are only, you know, equal powers in this geopolitical game if we are together. Because even the biggest country in Europe is still a small country in the bigger play. And if you see how all our adversaries, but now also our allies, actually want to divide us, deal with bilaterally with the countries. Why? Because then we are not equal powers. And that's why it is in the interest of everybody else, but not Europe. Now, and that's why, you know, always my question is why some countries very often do not see that actually, you know, having this just a bilateral relation and not doing this together with all of others makes us all weaker, because it gives you opportunity to play one against the other. But it's hard because the interests are different in member states towards different countries. But clearly, this is the time where we really need to do it. Because what I said as well, if I go around the world, I really see that the majority of countries in the world want the world that is based on some kind of rules. And if you take all the superpowers, and who is the next that actually still believes in the international law and rules and rules-based order, it's Europe. So they all turn to us, and they say that, you know, if you come with initiatives, we come with you, because we definitely want a world that is based on some kind of rules. Why we have so many wars around the world right now is because this you know, international order has been damaged. You know, some say also it has never worked, actually, but still, I think it has worked better than it's working now.
I was recently in Armenia teaching students about European integration, and I asked them what they expect from Europe. And the answer was clear. Nothing, they said. Nothing. We care about security. That's the only thing we care. And we can get security only from Russia or from the US. And Russia betrayed us, so we are only waiting for the US. And we are not waiting for the EU. The EU has only money, but no weapons, right? What would you answer this student?
Yeah. First, my first answer is like, look at Venezuela. Did Russia go to help their biggest friend? No. Look at Iran. Does Russia help their allies? No. So I wouldn't really put my bets on Russia because they are really failing their friends. Oh, Syria, Assad regime, the same. I mean, they totally left them alone. It's like, okay, don't look at us. So first, this is my first point. Second point is that, we are a reliable partner. And third point is, yes, we are not equal military power to United States, but we are working on this. We really are working on this to boost our own defense, to boost our own defense industry, to be an equal military power. But what we are economic power. So you can't also overlook that. And even, Armenia, we are helping them a lot because they are fighting the foreign malign influence and manipulation that comes from outside. So when they are in need, actually they turn to Europe, and we are always the good guys helping even those who haven't helped us.
Okay. Now, who wants to ask a question? I saw a hand over there, please. This gentleman with the red tie.
You were mentioning 3 pillars, I think, of the European values. But after all this crisis, don't you think you must add 1 or 2 more pillars to make the whole thing attractive? One pillar maybe security, and another one maybe de-bureaucratization. Isn't that what we read in all papers, that all the people are worried about that? Why not adding pillars instead of always talking about the climate and things that we talked a lot?
I'm saying that we are working on the security part to become a military power. When it comes to bureaucracy, then yes, we are also cutting that. But at the same time, I must also say that, this bureaucracy brings our people clean air, for example. I bring one example. What is the offer that Europe is making? Like, it was a good example in Serbia. Came to invest in a copper factory. What they did was to remove all the filters, air filters, because it's more effective to produce like this. So they brought their own people to build the factory, and then they extracted as much left, and the people started dying of lung cancer around the factory because they didn't really care. And that is the difference. I mean, if we want this quality of life, it is due to also the rules that we have, all the rules that we have regarding freedom of press, or the rules that we have also about the quality of life. So I wouldn't really put this that it's a negative thing, because I've been to a lot of countries where you can't really breed anything. And climate change, by the way, again, if you go, I was in Singapore at the conference where also there were representatives from other countries, and one was saying that we don't come here to preach you about climate change. But later I had meetings with all those countries, and they were saying that, the climate change is our biggest worry, because we are literally losing our ground. Our people can't live here. So if you're saying that we are not preaching you about climate change, then you say we don't care. But this is the difference, I think, between Europe and some other big powers, that we actually care, also learning from our history. And this also has value right now, especially when the way to operate is competition and really coercive power politics. So I would say so that you cannot overcome your weaknesses always, but you can focus on your strength to be even stronger there. And that is what we should do and are doing.
this terrible war in Ukraine is one thing now lasting for 4 years, but now we have a second war in our neighborhood again, right? We have Iran, and it's getting a lot of your plate. You know, it's how do you think the Europeans can deal with that conflict, but which has a potential to become bigger and produce refugees and whatever you think about that? How are you prepared to deal with that?
Oh, well, you know, I don't know. I always get into trouble when I make jokes, but you know, the wars are actually very easy to start, but quite hard to stop. And nobody knows what is the outcome. That is also what is happening now. So, of course, we have plans ready for, you know, the waves of migration and all this that comes, because, you know, people don't want to leave their homes unless they really have to, and they have to if there's a war or the climate change does not leave them any possibilities. And there are more wars in the world right now than ever before. You have the war in Sudan still ongoing. You have Congo, Rwanda. You have, of course, the war in Ukraine. You have now in the Middle East, in a broader area. Like every day we hear of new countries under attack. So, of course, we're trying to also work with diplomatic track to end this. And there, you know, there's always one thing is the declaration that now is peace. You just bang the heads together and say, you know, just admit that there is peace. But that is actually not sustainable, because the societies need to buy into this. You know, for the whole of society approach, if you think of Colombia, I mean, I don't remember what year it was, but, you know, there was a peace agreement, but the society didn't accept it. And there is where actually Europe comes in. The broader mediation, how to actually have the reconciliation in the society, so that, you know, you exit this cycle. And there again, I stress accountability, because if there is accountability, then also the victims can say that, okay, these people who committed these atrocities or made these decisions to start this war are accountable, so they can, you know, revert from revenge. But if there is not any such thing, then it will continue and continue. Of course, on Middle East, US has much bigger leverage over the actors there than we have. But again, you know, we are trying to help with the tools that we have in our hands.
Okay, thank you so much. Now, do we have more questions? There's a question back there to the right. This gentleman.
Let some women ask.
Thank you for the word. I like your word accountability. And what we are waiting is that I went through some film statements of you the last year. You said that Israel should be accountable for what they did. So what we are waiting for is, when is Europe imposing sanction on Israel? Sanction that will hurt Israel to stop this genocide. I mean, Europe had no problem to impose sanction on Russia. I understand that. But when do you want to impose sanction on Israel? Thank you very much.
Thank you. This is the question that is related to the common foreign and security policy. We have 27 member states. On Ukraine, we are very much united and have been from the start. Now it is more difficult with one member state blocking, and we can't right now like to adopt the 20th package of sanctions, for example, because one is blocking. In Israel, it is much more complicated than that. And this is because of the history of different historical background and relationships, which is that we don't have a common position. We have a common position on supporting the two-state solution. We have a common position in humanitarian aid and that the ceasefire has to hold and all this, but we don't have a common position on sanctions. And this is a decision of where 27 member states need to be on board. It has been put on the table several times, and we just can't reach an agreement. And right now, there are also some member states are saying that we should give a peace in Gaza also a chance. But this is the situation. We are a union of 27 member states with 27 democracies and different backgrounds that is making it harder. Of course, that is also putting a question to us that we need to really reform our decision making, because I feel that when we are not able to adopt decisions in a very crucial cases, then we are losing, especially our young people, that are saying that, Europe can't deliver, Europe can't decide. So clearly this is a problem that we need to work with, which is our decision making process.
But a difficult problem, right? If you want to change that. Let's have for the next question a woman, please. Voila. Microphone is coming.
Thank you very much. To paraphrase maybe the Armenian students, what specific steps are you taking to project power in order to lead in this world to whether it's a new world order? That would be very helpful to understand. But specific steps.
Yeah, well, specific steps. Like I say, one very specific step that we are doing is how we are increasing our defense expenditure to become hard military power as well. So we have different instruments, different joint initiatives that we do, because so far defense has been very national. But we see clearly what is happening in Middle East, but also what is happening in Ukraine, that we need to have a regional approach. These capabilities are very expensive and covering a larger area. So we need to do this together. And there are several issues that I can bring. We have 9 capability coalitions. We have identified our capability gaps. We are working on those, coming from, air defense to ammunition to actually become also hard power when it comes to military. But what we are also doing, because the other leg is the economic power. And there, we have been economic power, but we are losing a lot because we are not competitive enough. And there we are also working with different strands. One is cutting bureaucracy, which is important, and creating possibilities for our companies, so that actually, you have that we remain economic powers. And of course, if I start to list all this, it's kind of boring and dry, I would say. But yes, we are working on those lines. And also, again, I come back to the where our strength comes is when we are united. And that's why we also need to work with our decision-making process. And one thing I forgot to say, actually, Europe is attractive because you think how many countries want to join European Union right now. I mean, even I was in Canada last March, and when I arrived there, they said that there is a strong support of joining the European Union. I was like, ha ha ha, it's a very funny thing. But then it turned out they said, no, I can show you polls, and almost like it was like over 40% of Canadian people want to join European Union. And then I understand, okay, this is serious. So I say, I think, it's kind of hard because we have in the treaties, you have to be, geographically in Europe. And they had a response to that. We are connected via the Arctic. Voila. So we definitely have some appeal.
Thank you very much. In your plans, are you for defense? Are you still planning in the NATO framework, or are you also looking for alternative networks now where the world is changing?
Yes, that is a very good question. So 23 countries of European Union are also members of NATO. So majority of NATO members are also European Union members. That is saying that NATO has very good structures, and we need to strengthen the European part of NATO, so that if we are making all these steps that we are making for the defense of our countries, it's also making NATO stronger. Now, why I'm not in favor of creating any alternative European structures? Because again, coming from a country maybe that has thought these things very much through, is that in crisis, when you actually need the military power to defend yourself, what is the most important thing? It's the chain of command. Who gives orders to whom? In NATO, we have it very clear how the armies of European countries work together, who gives orders to whom, because everybody has their, the army chiefs, and then they, are agreeing to work together so that, who gives orders in these crises. If we create an alternative structure for Europe, then first question comes, you have NATO's armies are comprised of member states. So you have a German army, you have a French army, you have an Estonian army, and they all work together. Now, if you try to create another structure, then the first question is, will they create another German army, another French army, another, Estonian army? No, if you look at the discussions, it's impossible. So you still have one army. And now, in terms of crisis, if you have two alternative structures, the most risky part is that nobody knows how the chain of command is. Is it now the European or is it NATO? And that's why, and then the ball falls in between, which is in terms of crisis, a very, very bad thing. So that's why we are strengthening European members who are also part of NATO, but we are not creating any alternative structures because the NATO as such still works.
Thank you very much for a clear answer. Now, additional questions? Maybe some young people, that would also be helpful. I don't want to offend anybody. I see a lady back there, if this is okay.
Can I make a joke about young people? In my family, it's the young people line always goes where my parents are usually. Right now, all the people under 77 are young. But I had a discussion with my friends because where does the line go? Who is young? And then one of my friends said a very, very interesting thing is that you become old when you start to put leftovers to your guests when they leave the party, because in young people's party, there are never leftovers.
That's right. So back in, I saw this
Yes.
woman, please. Yeah.
Hello?
Yeah,
Okay.
please.
Hi. I wanted to ask, you talked about the the Iran situation and also Russia and China posing a risk to the international order. However, we witnessed for the last 2 years a genocide committed by Israel, which is an ally of the EU. We saw that there was no sanctions as had previously been criticized.
Is this the same question we had before, or?
No, so I want to ask, do you think that Israel and the US, especially looking at what they're doing in Iran right now, unprovokingly attacking another sovereign nation, do you think that Israel and the US pose a threat to the international world order?
International law gives you two possibilities to use force. One is for self-defense, and the other one is under the UN Security Council resolution. So whoever uses force has to justify that they are using this under the international law. Otherwise, it's not in accordance with international law. Now, that is also my point about the accountability. The UN Charter is very clear. It's very clear about the principles, what is right, what is wrong, how the states should communicate with each other, how the relations are. But what it lacks still is accountability. What happens if somebody breaches the international law? And that's why what I was also advocating, we need to develop the international law further, that it has the accountability part, because that is also preventing the wars from happening. If you have clear risk that you are accountable. Very often you have, wars. I'm sorry for all the gentlemen in the room, but, there's one guy that decides that I go and send my soldiers to another country to kill, the fathers, sons, and brothers of another country. So you send your fathers, sons, and brothers to kill other countries' sons, brothers, and fathers. And they pay with their lives. But these people who decide, they don't feel the pain that these people who suffer feel. So that's why, for example, in Ukraine's case, we have also initiated the tribunal for the crime of aggression, because this is really to target those who are deciding to go to war that is against the international order. But like I say, we have big problems with the international law right now.
Thank you very much. We probably have slowly to come to an end. Maybe a last very personal question. Do you have any special relations to Switzerland yet? I ask you that because we have a little gift for you. These are two cocktail glasses, and in the middle, in 3 dimensions, is the Matterhorn. So whenever you drink it out, you see Switzerland in the future, right?
Yes. If you say Matterhorn, then I was skiing there last year, but I don't know if that counts actually. So, I have good friends in Switzerland, and this is, you don't really maybe understand when you have always been living in this free world, that how much this matters. I mean, when I was a young kid, and when you're sick and then your grandmother babysits for you, and then she was always telling me these stories about, the golden Estonian age, and she spoke very good German, so she applied to a job in Finland to teach German in one family. And then that family, whose head was captain on a ship, they took also her to go to England. And I remember a child behind the Iron Curtain, a child who didn't have any freedom at all. I was like, Grandma, don't tell me these fairy tales. How was it possible that you just went to Finland and then you went to England and nobody asked you any questions? Or like, how did they let you out? I mean, how did they let you out? And I remember genuinely how I didn't believe that. And now when I'm living this world, one day I'm in Switzerland now, tomorrow I'm in some other country, and it is so easy. But it has not been so easy. So let's not take it for granted. This is a huge thing that we have friends around Europe, that we don't have borders really, that people can go and travel and also experience. We have so much different culture and so much differences that we can really cherish.
Thank you very much. So we have... So we have to work a little bit more on that Swiss relations, right? I find that out. Thank you very much. You're always welcome back. Now, in order to conclude, I would like to hand over the microphone to Sir Noel Quinn. He's the chairman of Bank Julius Baer, our cooperation partner for many years for this Churches Symposium. Please.
Your Excellency, Vice President Kallas, Federal Councillors, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Your visit to Switzerland today arrives at a moment of intensifying geopolitical tensions, where traditional alliances have been re-evaluated and long-held certainties appear increasingly fragile. At such a pivotal juncture, values such as freedom, peace, stability, and independence stand firmly at the forefront of our collective conscience. Thank you for your powerful and deeply insightful address and the humanity with which you delivered it. And thank you for reminding us that Europe must urgently pursue greater resilience, cooperation, and unity in times like these. As a British citizen, as a British citizen and a European citizen through my Irish heritage, and for those that may be doubting me, I had my European passport way before Brexit. It was not expediency. I do hold Churchill close to my heart, and a leader that I have read many times, and a leader who I see as a person who led through values, who could see through uncertain and hazy times of today and see a vision of the future that was better than they were experiencing at that time. A leader with conviction and determination, and a leader who could inspire and mobilize people behind that vision. But also not a perfect leader, but a leader who people were willing to follow. And I think much of what was said today is about seeking leadership in uncertain times and finding a path to the future. So it really is a true privilege to co-host this event for the first time as the chairman of Julius Baer, alongside such a distinguished speaker, and fittingly so, in the year we commemorate the 80th anniversary of Sir Winston Churchill's landmark speech here in Zurich. Let us also remember Europe is more than just the European Union. It is an entire continent bound by shared history, culture, and destiny. That is precisely why your message resonates powerfully beyond EU borders, reaching into Switzerland, whose identity and future remain closely interlinked with those of the EU. It was here in Zurich in 1946, and this very venue, that Churchill issued his visionary call for European unity. An appeal born in the shadows of war, aimed squarely at reconciliation and collective strength. 80 years on, that same call echoes once again with renewed urgency. Situated at the heart of Europe, Switzerland shares deep ties with the EU. Common values, overlapping cultures, linguistic affinities, and tightly integrated economies. Even though not an EU member, Switzerland and the EU have built a robust framework of bilateral agreements over more than 25 years, delivering overall tangible benefits to both sides. Just last Monday, Swiss Federal Chancellor Guy Parmelin and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen signed the new Swiss-EU agreement package, commonly referred to as Bilaterals 3. Its ratification now awaits parliamentary approval and eventually a referendum here in Switzerland. Importantly, these agreements lay the foundation for a strengthened high-level political dialogue, opening pathways to deeper collaboration and mutual market access across fields of shared interest. Trade between Switzerland and the EU continues to grow stronger, and especially in sectors such as financial services. The opportunities for expanded cooperation remain significant. As newly appointed chairman of Julius Baer, a global wealth manager headquartered here in Switzerland, and from my time in my previous role, running a global institution, I witness daily how deeply interconnected our economic fates truly are. Predictable, stable relationships between Switzerland and the EU do not merely benefit business. They strengthen societies, support long-term investment, and safeguard the interests of clients and families across generations and borders. The Swiss Financial Centre stands ready to contribute constructively to the objectives of the EU Savings and Investment Union, with continued goodwill and mutual understanding, with further integration in financial services. Vice President Kallas, there is a tradition that I was advised on, and that is a gift. And over the years, it has become a cherished tradition at the Churchill Symposium to present our esteemed guests with a symbolic Swiss token. Knowing of your passion for puzzles and your curiosity for learning, we thought we had found something particularly suited to you. Though not quite a riddle to solve, allow me to instead to offer a small interactive companion, a quiz game themed around an alpine ascent of Swiss cows and questions on Swiss landscapes, society and political life. I think I'm going to buy myself one as well. I have quite a bit of learning to do. Designed equally to inform and entertain, it offers a light-hearted way to engage with the intricacies of Switzerland beyond skiing. A quiz game that could also be helpful to me as I continue to discover this wonderful country. May it bring you both enjoyment and insight, and I thank you so much for your very, very insightful speech today.
The audience and the two delegations are leaving the audience, and I ask you to remain seated for about 1 or 2 minutes, then follow up. Thank you very much.